Good morning. I'm Gary Beverly, President of CWAG. Thank you for viewing this webinar presented by the Citizens Water Advocacy Group. Founded in 2002, CWAG is a local science-based citizens group dedicated to working for a sustainable water future for the Prescott Active Management Area and to protecting the upper Verde River and to ensure safe water quality for all of us. Due to the virus, CWAG is suspended in-person meetings for the foreseeable future, but water issues continue. So we're using webinars instead of in-person meetings until the virus no longer threatens our health. During the webinar, your video and audio is disabled, so no one can hear or see you. This is sort of like watching TV from your point of view. This program is being recorded and will be available for viewing at your convenience on our website. Let me just take a second here to load up our website and show you a couple of things. So this is cwagaz.org, our website. And so there's a ton of information here I want to alert you to. This area, our water supply, covers our description of the water resource situation in the Prescott Active Management Area. So when you click on that in the blue bar, you get submenus come up over here. Click on a submenu and these articles appear. So there's a lot of information and reading here if you do consider. The Verde River section right here is a similar thing, talking about the Verde River. We appreciate the support of our memberships and urge you to join. So here's the join, renew, donate button down here, and a form comes up eventually that you can fill out and join by online. Also in this quick link section is the video archive. And so clicking there, you'll see a list of all our previous programs. And so this session is being recorded and will be available here later this afternoon. So please consider joining us. We really welcome the interest and support of new members. So during the webinar, you can submit questions to the speakers at any time by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can, after the presentation, we'll answer your questions. So today's presentation addresses a couple of related questions that CWAG frequently receives. Things like, how long will our water last? Do we have enough water to support recent growth? So Ed Wolf and I are the presenters, but we've just discovered that Ed is having some computer connection issues. So I'm going to try and describe his slide set. So with that, let me get started here with the presentation and put my slides up on the screen. So, all right, so I guess I'm standing in for Ed here. I hope this works. Okay, so the answer to those questions really depends on a lot of other factors, state law and local policies. So we're going to talk some about the state law today, and we'll see some of the effects of local government policy. The answer to those questions depends upon the capacity and the current condition of the aquifer. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And it depends upon our current water usage and how much we'll use in the future as our community grows. So that's kind of a snapshot of what we're going to cover. So let's get started with the law here. In 1980, Arizona passed the Groundwater Management Act. And this is, the photo here is of the Central Arizona Project Canal headed east towards Phoenix. The feds required a Groundwater Management Act before they would consent to financing the Central Arizona Project, which takes Colorado River water to central and southern Arizona. So the purpose of the Groundwater Management Act was to transition groundwater usage to surface that is renewable water. Now, in Arizona, surface water and groundwater are managed independently. This is a major flaw in water law. Obviously, surface water and groundwater are hydrologically connected. It's all part of the same water cycle, but legally they're separate with different laws. This is a problem because groundwater pumping, which is one of the main things we'll talk about today, actually captures stream flow. Groundwater pumping will reduce the flow of a spring or stream, such as the Verde River or the Aquifer River. This creates a legal and management nightmare all across the state. It's probably impossible to change this separate management at this point, but this is a very fundamental difficulty in water law that increases the stress on rivers and springs. You know, the continued flow of the Verde and Aquifer and Del Rio Springs are part of CWAG's mission. And so this is an example of how that problem with surface and water law being managed differently. This is an example of how it hurts a river. So here's the Verde River. Here is Paulden here, and Prescott and Prescott Valley have planned a pipeline to take groundwater from the Big Chino Aquifer and transmit it to Prescott in Prescott Valley. So as we take groundwater out of the Big Chino, that's less water that flows out of Verde Springs, the headwaters of the Verde River. So groundwater pumping here will capture water that's destined to flow down the river. And water law doesn't address that. That's a big problem. So water law threatens Arizona rivers. You see here the San Pedro River in 2005 dried up for the first time in 100 years. Here's, oops, sorry. Here's the Gila River south of Chandler. It's a ditch full of tumbleweeds. It's horrible. The Verde is the last river, perennial river in the state that's in decent condition, and you see a nice photo of it here. So we're working to keep the Verde alive. And groundwater pumping, which is mainly to support residential development, is a main threat to the Verde. So I want to get back on groundwater. The Groundwater Management Act, it's Title 45 in Arizona Revised Statutes. And it's like, I don't know, 100 pages of details. And then it's supplemented by another vast section 12 of the Arizona Administrative Code. So water law is super complex. It's just job security for water lawyers. And so just make a couple of points about this. The Groundwater Management Act established the Arizona Department of Water Resources, which we're going to call ADWR from now on. And this is a fundamental thing that most people don't realize, is that it established that groundwater is not a property right. Instead, groundwater belongs to all Arizona citizens. It's managed by ADWR as kind of a trust for them. We're not real happy with that management, I have to say. So by not a property right, I mean that, like, if you had gold underneath your property, that would be your gold. And you have groundwater underneath your property, but it's not your groundwater. You don't have a property right to it. You have a right to use it, but you don't have a right, you don't own it. Also, the Groundwater Management Act established active management areas, such as these 5 in the state. And you can see the Prescott AMA in Northern Arizona is tiny compared to these others. All these AMAs have different management goals. For Prescott, Phoenix, and Tucson, the management goal is safe yield. They need to achieve safe yield by 2025. The water law includes so many exceptions and loopholes that at least in the Prescott AMA, safe yield is probably not achievable. I'm going to talk a lot about those exceptions and loopholes as we go through. So what's safe yield? Safe yield is a management goal to achieve a long-term balance between groundwater recharge and withdrawals. So that sounds kind of good. It sounds like if that was your bank account, if you had, you know, a certain amount, $1,000 coming in every month, and you spent $1,000 in that month, and you'd kind of be in balance. So that sounds great. Unfortunately, in terms of hydrology, it's a myth. The USGS says it's just not possible. I won't go into that now, but in the Prescott AMA, the management goal is safe yield by 2025. So I've got a map here showing the Prescott AMA. And so let's start in the downstream end. Here's Humboldt, Dewey Humboldt here. Here's the Agua Fria River. This is Lynx Creek. Here's the Agua Fria River. This is Highway 69 that heads south down to I-17. Here's State Route 169. So here's Prescott, and Prescott Valley is here. And there's a little dotted dark line separating these two that comes up and goes along Highway 89A, which heads over to Mingus Mountain and Jerome. And then it slides up here a little bit. But this area on this side of the dotted line is the Agua Fria subbasin. And it's actually a different surface watershed. So when rain falls in this area, it drains into the Agua Fria, which goes down to Lake Pleasant. When rain falls in this upper area, it would wind up in Granite Creek and flow up north to the Verde River. So the Prescott AMA contains two surface watersheds, which sounds kind of confusing, but actually the groundwater basins, the Little Chino subbasin up here and the Agua Fria subbasin down here are connected, and it functions as a connected groundwater resource, which is why ADWR selected these boundaries. So here's Highway 89 headed north through Chino Valley up to Ash Fork. The Verde River is off at the top. It's out of the AMA. The Del Rio Springs is right here, right at the very top part. So the management goal for this area then is safe yield, a balance between withdrawals and recharge. So it's a goal. It's not a requirement. There's no penalty if you don't achieve safe yield. There's no incentive to achieve safe yield. It's a responsibility of the region, all these entities, 4 towns, the Quad Cities, and Yavapai County. It's not a responsibility of ADWR. ADWR provides some data, but no assistance. At this point, there's no regional plan to achieve safe yield, and they're not even discussing if they should discuss a potential meeting to discuss a plan. I mean, we're very far away from any kind of a safe yield plan for the area. So this is a pretty bad setup here from Arizona water law. So look, imagine that the government came to you and said, okay, I want you and your 2 neighbors on each side. I want you 5 people to give us $5,000. You work it out amongst yourself, how you're going to get the money and where you're going to get it. And by the way, if you don't give it, there's no penalty. If you do give it, you don't get any incentives for it. So it's just your responsibility. What do you want to do? What do you think is going to happen? Nothing. That's exactly why the goal of safe yield is not being effective in Arizona. So overdraft. Overdraft is a measurement. We're going to talk a lot about overdraft in a second. Overdraft is a measurement of how far we are from safe yield. So when you have overdraft, it lowers the water level in the aquifer. We're going to show you that in a minute. It causes wells to dry up. We're going to show you that in a few minutes. It reduces water quality, and it degrades flows from rivers and springs. So overdrafting the aquifer is a condition that where you're not in safe yield, where you're withdrawing more water from the ground than is being recharged. In the Prescott Active Management Area, we have the highest percentage overdraft of all AMAs in Arizona. We're the worst. So Ed was going to start talking here, but so now I get to try and channel Ed. So he's showing you here the Prescott Active Management Area map. And so the aquifer is bounded by these hard rock areas that don't hold water all around the edges, hard rock boundaries around the edges. The water holding aquifers tend to be in the middle. And so here we see the subbasin boundary I was talking about before, the Little Chino subbasin and the Upper Agua Fria subbasin. That's 485 square miles, but probably a little more than half of that is actually water, groundwater containing area. Here's a Google Earth view of that. And now you can see the mountains around the side. These are the hard rock areas that kind of define this basin. So here's Dewey Humboldt down here. And this is like Lonesome Valley, Chino Valley, Prescott Valley. So these areas in here are the water bearing areas. Prescott is kind of a hard rock basin. It doesn't really have an aquifer system underlying the town of Prescott. So within, groundwater moves. And so rain falls on the mountains, runs into the mountain front, and runs into the ground, and the groundwater drains in these directions. The blue arrows show you which way it's moving. So in the southeastern part, it's running down underground past Dewey Humboldt and surfacing at the Agua Fria River. In the northern part of the subbasin, it exits at Del Rio Springs, and then there's an underground flow that feeds the Verde River. So the groundwater moves, it moves a few feet per day. Stream flow, though, like the Verde River might go 15 miles in a day. So groundwater flows, but certainly not as quickly as a river. So this graph shows, chart shows water level change between 1940 and 1994. And so this -75 line here, so every place inside this line has a water level decrease, groundwater level decrease more than 75. Here's the 50-foot line. So quick takeaway is that groundwater levels in the northern part of the AMA are falling about 1.5 feet a year, and this has been going on for many decades. And Del Rio Springs shows the effect of that decrease. In the Agua Fria subbasin, the groundwater declines are less. There still are declines. Here's some substantial declines surrounding one of Prescott Valley's well fields, but the declines are greater in the northern, in the Little Chino, because this was a large agricultural area starting in the 1940s when the deep well turbine pump was invented. They started pumping a lot of groundwater and growing beans, hay, alfalfa, corn, etc. That water use by agriculture has now been shifted into water use by Prescott. Prescott gets all of its water from wells right here in central Chino. So these groundwater declines are due to irrigation, wells, and homes in Chino and in Prescott. So groundwater levels are declining. The biggest problem is in the northern part of the aquifer. Here's a hydrograph showing what's happened to a particular well in Prescott Valley. This one's going down 1.7 feet per year. So it's useful to see the area, how the groundwater level changes, is changing over an area. And this is showing you one spot kind of right in here. That well is there. And so it's showing you in one spot how it changes over time. Groundwater levels are falling, and that's due to the overdraft. Here's a graph that updates this a little bit through 2010. And the red dots are declines in groundwater level. So we're seeing groundwater declines in the upper aquifer over 100 feet. And now in the Agua Fria, we're seeing lesser declines, but it's going down. This area has not been pumping groundwater as long as this area has. So, but the pumping that occurs here is decreasing the water table. Some blue dots here right down in the southeast corner. This is increases in water level. Lynx Creek is a major tributary groundwater, a major surface water feed that goes into groundwater here. And I think these reflect the contribution of Lynx Creek in this area. So the people in Dewey-Humboldt are not in a bad situation, excuse me, at this moment, but as groundwater pumping increases in the Agua Fria and in here in the northern, in the Little Chino, these wells are going to turn into red dots too. So Dewey-Humboldt's probably in a little bit better shape than anybody else, but the Little Chino is really the most impacted by groundwater pumping. One effect of that is that we've lost 6 miles of the Verde River already. So here's Del Rio Springs. The AMA border is right in here someplace. And so because Prescott is pumping, 6,000 acre feet a year roughly from Chino Valley up in here, that intercepts groundwater that's destined to flow to Del Rio Springs. And Del Rio Springs is now almost dry. In 1940, it was about 3,000 acre feet per year. Now it's 140. It's gone way, way down, and it's scheduled to dry up. ADWR predicts it'll dry up in 2025. This was the historical headwaters of the Verde River. This area, the dotted blue line, is all dry now. And it's dry down to the Verde Springs. So we've already lost 6 miles of the Verde River to groundwater pumping. And this has happened in our lifetimes. So this just shows an example of how groundwater pumping affects stream flows. So let's look at some overdraft numbers. Overdraft is when you're pumping more than is being recharged. And so this is data from ADWR, and it shows that up until about 1996 or so, there were years, wet years, where we actually had more water going in than we were pumping out, and a few drier years where we had an overdraft. But in 1996, things changed big time. And so we had a wet year in 2005 and in 2010. But basically, we've been overdrafting heavily since then. If we look at this in a cumulative effect, you can see that here's 1985, overdraft, a little bit of recharge, overdraft, a little bit of recharge. So this goes on. But after about 1996, the situation changes. I mean, here it's relatively stable, but here it starts really accumulating a huge deficit in groundwater. The average annual overdraft is over 13,000 acre feet. So to get an idea of what that means, imagine a football field and fill it with water. And that'd be 2.5 miles high, 2.5 miles deep. Each year, we're taking a football field of water 2.5 miles deep out of our groundwater. So this can't go on forever. This is a bunch of numbers from ADW. I'm going to skip through this because I don't know what Ed was going to say about it. So why do we have this overdraft? Because we're pumping too much, and also because climate is changing and exacerbating the problem. So Ed did some great graphs on this. I'm really sorry he can't participate and describe his work. So this is precipitation in the area, and this is the orange line is the 10-year running average. I mean, precipitation data is very variable, but you kind of have to average it out. In about 1996, we see a pretty steady decline in precip. So it's drier. And also, this is temperatures. We see that it's getting warmer really quick. Started getting warmer, I guess, in the 70s, but now it's warmer and drier in this section. It's called a drought. We're actually in the midst of the most intense drought since the 16th century. So that has an impact on the river. When there's less rainfall, there's less recharge. When there's higher temperatures, there's less recharge. And the flow in the river goes down. Declining stream flows are shown here. Once again, this is the base flow on the Verde River. So this is, if we look at the daily flow, the daily average flow in the Verde River at the Paulden, the USGS Paulden gauge, you can see that we look for the lowest stretch of 7 days with the lowest flow and average that out. So that's kind of called the base flow. That is the component of river flow that comes from groundwater. And we're seeing, so that, in other words, it's different water source than precipitation. So it's usually, this is a dry period of year. Usually this occurs in late June. So we're seeing a market decline, a shocking actually decline in annual low flow values between 1996 and 2019. And this last year, we saw record low flows, the lowest flows we've seen on the Upper Verde since 1963. So overpumping, the overdraft, overpumping causes the overdraft. Climate change exacerbates the overdraft by decreasing recharge. And this shows up at Del Rio Springs being nearly dry, and it shows up as the Verde River rapidly declining in flow. This is a matter of great concern for us. The river is very sensitive. It's delicate at this point. We need to take extra care. Similar behavior shows up at the Clarkdale gauge, which is at mile 37 downstream, 27 miles down, further downstream from the Paulden gauge. Similar kind of behavior there. So, as we overdraft and water levels decline, we have stream flow declining, we have springs drying up. Another issue is water quality. So water utilities in AMA are regulated by ADEQ and the Safe Drinking Water Act. Private wells have no regulations. Arsenic and nitrate problems can appear as the aquifer is depleted. Now, this is a big topic, and I'm not going to tackle it here, but we're thinking that maybe February we'll have a whole program on this. At this time, municipal water supplies in Prescott Valley and Prescott are safe. They meet the Safe Drinking Water Act standards, barely in some cases. So they are legally safe. Our concern is that what's legal is not necessarily healthy, and that's the thing we'll talk about in our, I think in our February program. So I'm not going to go into this in great detail at this moment, but this declining water quality is one of the 3 consequences of overdraft and falling water levels. This is something I want to talk to you about though right now. This is, CWAG has been investigating failing wells around the edges of the aquifer. So if you drive around Chino Valley, you can see a lot of scenes like this. This is if you drive around, not so much in the corporate limits of Chino Valley, but on the outskirts. This is south of the Chino Valley town limits. And this gentleman had a house, he had animals, he had a barn, he had a garden, he had 25 years, he had a good well, which was in this well house. And then in 2010, it went dry. So he put in a big water tank, and now this water tank supplies water to the house, not as well. The well no longer functions. And he has to pay to get this filled up twice a month. It probably costs $150 a month to have water hauled in for his well. And he now has no garden, and has no horses. A horse drinks 25 gallons a day. So they had to let all that stuff go. So big change in lifestyle right there. So this is in west of Chino Valley. Here's another house with a big water storage tank. Here's another one in West Chino Valley. This guy is hauling water himself. So you can buy water from a public water hydrant in Chino Valley. You know, you put in your credit card and you get your tank filled up. Here's another one, another guy hauling water. I have dozens and dozens of these photographs. This photograph actually shows 2 homes with water tanks. So CWAG started thinking, how could we find out how many of these are there? So we look on Google Earth, and here's a property in West Chino, and I've blacked out the street name, but this is a water tank, clearly visible in Google Earth. Is this a rainwater harvesting tank? Well, what's he watering? I mean, there's nothing around here, but he mowed the weeds, you can see. There's no lawn, the trees here are juniper or sometimes an elm tree that don't need or get water. This is not a rainwater harvesting tank. This is probably his well house and a workshop. This guy's hauling water. So this shows up really clearly. And so CWAG hired an intern, Ariela Thompson, to go scrutinizing through Google Earth. And here's what we found. We found over 500 of these big water storage tanks. There's a big cluster here in West Chino, a big cluster in South Chino, many tanks along Williamson Valley Road, and a surprising number of tanks in Coyote Springs. So here's Highway 89A that heads over to Mingus Mountain, and this is Fain Road, right? So Coyote Springs is this development here. This area in here is Viewpoint, is that right? And you don't see any wells in there. That's on Prescott Valley City Water. So these tanks, as you can notice, are on the edges of the aquifer. See, here's the edges here, the hard rock boundary around the edge. And these guys are, these are homes that had good wells. And then as the water level has dropped in these areas, their wells are failing. So we were shocked at this. We're not done investigating. This is the first time I've shown this slide. We're still doing some data checking and collecting stories from people. If any of you have a dry well, please contact us at info@cwagaz.org, and I'll write back to you, and maybe we can have a phone call or talk. Maybe we can help you figure out ways to conserve water, to minimize your water hauling expense. Perhaps CWAG can help you out of a difficult situation. Failing wells line the edges of the aquifer. So how do you respond to a failing well? Well, people have to change their personal habits. They abandon gardens and trees. Some install gray water systems or rainwater harvesting. Sometimes you can lower the pump deeper in the well, but many times that doesn't work. Sometimes you can drill deeper, but more because of various well drilling issues, more likely you're going to have to drill a new well. Well, if your old well went dry, your new well is probably not going to hit water either. So this is a real crapshoot. This could cost $10,000, $20,000 and wind up with a dry hole. Know a lot of people that have done that. So you could leave your pump in the hole and put a low water cutoff switch. So when the pump would take all the water out of the well, shut itself off so it wouldn't burn up. So you can put a trickle into your storage tank and kind of accumulate a teeny bit of water, you know, a quart an hour or something from the well, and that'll help. So that's just why those storage tanks indicate a failing well. Or if the well is totally useless, and I've talked with many people whose wells are just dry, nothing, you just have to haul water to fill the tank. So there's services that do that. Usually people get a load of up to 2,000 gallons for $80. That happens twice a month. This is expensive. And finally, their property value is about cut in half. This is the major asset for many of these people. The people in the Chino Valley area are not wealthy people, let me put it that way. And so this is a real punch in the stomach for these families to lose half of the value of their main asset, their home, and increase monthly expenses. So this is kind of a social justice issue. You know, you have to wonder if this is really fair for those of us with good wells or people in Prescott Valley and Prescott to pump dry the wells of these people on the edges of the aquifer. And remember I said that you don't have a property right to water. So when these people's wells go dry, they have no legal recourse. So here's the scorecard. The winners here are the municipal water systems. They're the least affected of all users. You know, like Prescott's wells are in central Chino Valley in the best water area, the best groundwater area. They'll go for a long time. There's no immediate crisis either in Prescott or in Prescott Valley municipal water systems. And even if they did have a well go dry, they have the financial capability to re-drill again and to purify that water and spread the cost over a vast user base. So the municipal water systems are okay. We don't want to say that the sky is falling here for municipal water systems, far from it. The losers, though, are family using domestic wells on the edges of the aquifer. They're the first to see the effects of the falling water table. They lack the financial resources to drill. They're forced to haul water, and they lose the value of their main asset, their home. So this is an issue that, as a compassionate society, we should give some thought to. So now I want to switch gears, get away from the consequences of falling water levels and talk about our future. And one concern is that water will limit growth. So some questions: where does the water for growth come from? I want to look at some history, and I want to look at the water laws and regulations. And I'm going to try and not make this too geeky, but frankly, it is a little bit geeky. And I just want to show you that growth is has momentum. Right now, there's growth that's going to happen in this area for decades, and it's kind of baked in by Arizona water law and the policies of Prescott Council. So in the Prescott AMA, we've got these groundwater levels falling. And in 1998, this is the history part, ADWR declared it to be an overdraft. And what that does is that activates the assured water supply rules. Now, those rules quantify the amount, and I put limits in quotes because they say that it limits groundwater pumping, but as you'll see, it doesn't really, because there's all these loopholes and special exceptions. Any existing users before this declaration of overdraft, they're grandfathered in. They don't have to follow the assured water supply rules. But after the assured water supply rules go into effect, new construction is regulated. Okay, so let's look and see what regulated means. So on lot splits, this means that a small lot is divided into 5 or fewer parcels, less than 6 parcels. And at this point, there's no regulation of roads, utilities, or water supply. And so these are kind of known sometimes as Wildcat Lot Splits. And these are not a good idea, but this is Arizona state law. In Yavapai County, the minimum lot size is 2 acres unless you have it rezoned or have a planned area development. So this means that you could take a 10-acre parcel and divide it into 5 2-acre parcels. And on each well, you could put a domestic well. And the domestic wells are exempt from reporting their pumping to ADWR. So they're known as exempt wells. They are regulated. Some water folks in the AMA claim that the exempt wells are a problem and that they are not regulated, but they are. They have to pump less than 35 gallons a minute and irrigate less than 2 acres. So are exempt wells responsible for the overdraft? Okay, full disclosure here. I live in Chino Valley and I have a well and I have an exempt well. So this is something that is this kind of statement, the allegation that exempt wells are responsible for the overdraft kind of annoys me. Just give me a minute to show you that that's bunk. This is data from ADWR. So there's ADWR identifies in the AMA, there's 13,257 exempt wells serving this population and they pump this much water. Okay, in the AMA as a whole, this is the population and that's the demand. So exempt wells pump 19.5%. Well, they have 19.5% of the population. They pump 12.8% of the water. I think that shows very simply that they're actually probably more efficient water users than the rest of the population. The exempt wells are not the problem, at very least, you have to say that. Exempt wells are family wells that serve a home. They don't use any more or less water than somebody in Viewpoint or Granville or wherever subdivision you choose. So I don't think that the allegation that's been made by some members of the Prescott City Council, and actually the mayor has said that exempt wells are a problem. People in Prescott Valley often say this. This is just wrong. So let's look at the regulations for subdivisions. So if a parcel is split into more than 6 or more subparcels, then it has to be an approved subdivision. And there's a process for that. The city and the county do regulate roads, utilities, and open spaces in subdivisions. And the water is regulated because new subdivisions must prove a 100-year water supply. And they do this by obtaining a certificate of assured water supply, abbreviated as a CAUS. They get that certificate from ADWR, and there's a whole procedure, which I won't go through, it's very complicated to show this. So in Prescott Valley and the county, ADWR issues these CAUS, these certificates. And so there's a process there that is expensive and time consuming. In Prescott, wait a minute, something happened here, I'm missing a bullet. In Prescott has a special status. It's a designated assured water supply provider. So that means that ADWR has given Prescott a portfolio of water, and then so Prescott now has the ability to say that this subdivision has a 100-year water supply, and the developer just has to deal with the city of Prescott. They don't have to go deal with ADWR. So it's much faster and much cheaper for developers. And it gives the city much more control over the use of their water supply. So in 1998, ADWR declared this AMA an overdraft, and that's what activated the assured water supply rules, and existing uses were grandfathered in. So in 1998, the Shamrock Water Company, which supplies water to Prescott Valley, it's now owned by the town of Prescott Valley, but at that point it was an independent water company owned by the Fain family. So Shamrock objected, and that delayed this order, and for a year. A year later, ADWR rejected their objection, and the assured water supply rules went into effect. So there was a year there when everybody knew what was coming, that the assured water supply rules were going to be put into effect soon. And so in that year, we had what's called the Great Plat Rush of 1998. 32,000 new preliminary plants were created in that period. These are grandfathered and not subject to the assured water supply rules. They don't have to prove a 100-year water supply. They don't need a certificate. Unregulated committed water was awarded. It's about 10,000 acre feet per year for 100 years, as 1 million acre foot of groundwater is what was committed. That's about 1/3 of the total groundwater content in our aquifer. This, you ought to be shocked at this. This is a preposterous, this is a major contributor to the overdraft. No replenishment is required, and it's obviously a major flaw in water law. There was a crack there, and this objection by Shamrock Water found the crack and wiggled through it. So the impacts of that Great Plat Rush are that in Prescott Valley, there was a lot of subdivisions that were just grandfathered in. The core of the town, Granville, Stone Ridge, Viewpoint, Pronghorn, and Quailwood. So if any of you are familiar with Prescott Valley, you know that's a lot of homes. There's thousands and thousands of homes. Were just put in with no assurance of, no certificate required, just grandfathered in under the old rules. So most of Prescott Valley's development since 1999 has been relying on these Great Plat Rush grandfathered lots. In Prescott, Prescott had some lots that were unbuilt, some from the Plat Rush and some that were just in the middle of the town. And so those got what's called a groundwater allowance. And so that was added to Prescott's water portfolio. So their portfolio looked like this little box here with 9644 acre feet. This was groundwater. And this is Prescott's highlighting. They said that that is not a resource that can be allocated by the city. Except in 2020, they changed their mind. And it's what I call the groundwater allowance gambit. Prescott's consultants found what I call a loophole in water law that says that they can take that groundwater allowance and use it for new development. That part of that water is used for new development is water that was conserved by responsible homeowners. So all of a sudden, they went from having a couple of 100 acre foot remaining to allocate to having 9,700 acre feet left to allocate. And so CWAG objected. We consulted a couple of water attorneys. They said, nope, it's a loophole. You can't do anything. So this reallocation is legal. We ask, is it wise? So let's see the impacts of that. So here's the momentum for growth. This is the first step in seeing how much growth can occur using existing legal water loopholes. How much do we have approved now that's unbuilt? There's the Jasper subdivision in Prescott Valley. Stringfield was just approved. AED, this is the deal to save the Dells, where there's this many, roughly this many home units in Prescott city limits, about this many in Prescott Valley. These numbers can move back and forth and shift a little bit. So all these are kind of approximations. The Deep Well Ranch was approved, annexed and approved, and I don't know, a few years ago. There's 10,400 units there. So I've tried to estimate this, and I asked the cities, I did a public information request and asked the cities to tell me how many units they've approved in the last several years. So I asked for that 3 weeks ago. Prescott Valley has yet to communicate with me. Prescott and Chino Valley have emailed me back and said, you know, we're working on this, but this is really hard for us to figure out, and we need some more time. Okay, well, thanks for letting me know. But the interesting thing here is that I would have thought these cities would have had a spreadsheet that tracked all the multi-unit housing and the apartments and the single family residences and the subdivisions that they've approved. But I guess that this means that cities aren't keeping track of the growth they've authorized. So that's something to ponder too. Why not? So just this 17,600 units are now authorized at this point. This is growth momentum. This is going to occur. We can't take this back. This won't go away. And that's a minimum because I'm missing a lot of data. Sorry, I can't get better numbers for you. But so we're just going to work with this minimum and see where this takes us. So when we query, you know, the cities about the recent really rapid growth, this is the reply. Everything's okay. There's plenty of water. We recharge 65 to 95%. Trust us, everything's okay. Well, everything's not okay. When they say they recharge, there's some pretty loose talk going on there. So I need to dive into recharge credits just briefly. There's three kinds of recharge credits. One type is permanent recharge. And so this benefits the aquifer. It's not recoverable. So when they put that water back into the ground, it's got to stay in the ground. So now Prescott is the only one that's doing this as required by Prop 400. And it's currently a small amount of water, about 100 acre feet, but a little bit helps. The other two types of recharge are no long-term benefit to the aquifer. There's short-term recharge credits, and Prescott puts water in the ground and they pump it back out. They use these credits. They use them up annually to support their current demand. There's long-term recharge credits, and Prescott Valley uses these. They recover them as needed to support new development. You can buy those credits. The developer would have to buy them to get a certificate of assured water supply for the development. So this is Prescott Valley is using these long-term credits now. So most of the recharge that they claim they're doing, all of it, doesn't help the aquifer at all. So every new home consumes groundwater, whether recharged or not. So if you take water out of the aquifer in Prescott, about 8% leaks. If we assume their new water conservation codes, they say just use drought tolerant plants. I'm going to take it a step further and say there's no use of groundwater on landscapes. So I'm going to give them a big edge right there. So that means that 92% of the water that comes into the water meter, that 92% of the water that comes out of the aquifer comes into the house, 8% gets lost here. There's about a 5% loss in the house, which means that the sewer gets 87% of what's taken out of the aquifer. Wastewater treatment has about a 7% loss, processing loss. We're assuming there'll be no new golf courses that directly reuse. And then it goes about 80% goes into recharge ponds. There's some evaporation. The aquifer recharge maximum possible using Prescott's current codes, which are the best in the AMA, is about 75%. Every new home consumes groundwater. So something happened to my slides there that got out of order. So Prescott and Prescott Valley say water use is strictly controlled by state law. We're following the law, so everything is okay. So next, I want to show you what the law allows. And I want to talk about paper water, and I'm going to define that as legally usable water that's not sustainably available. So this would be water that would be pumped out under overdraft conditions. So here's a big paper water thing, extinguishment credits. A farmer in Chino can take his irrigation rights and convert them to extinguishment credits. This is mainly comes from Chino Valley, but they can be used anywhere in the AMA. And you can buy these and use these to prove a 100-year water supply. 100 extinguishment credits gets you an acre foot per year for 100 years. So that then one credit supports about 5 homes. So what is the cost of these paper water credits for long-term storage and extinguishment credits? There's no market to establish the price. They're just available from individual right holders. And so there's no market like a stock market, you know, that sets an agreed upon price between buyers and sellers. It's all kind of ad hoc. Estimates, you know, range from like $12,000 to $30,000 per 100-year acre foot. So I'm going to say $15,000 for 1 acre foot, 100 years. That'd do 5 homes. It's about $3,000 a home to buy water for a home that might cost $400,000. This is easily affordable. So these paper water credits are out there actually in great quantity, and they're affordable for home buyers, home builders. Another credit that's available is historically irrigated acreage. So this applies only in the Big Chino Valley. And if farmland was irrigated once between 1975 and 1999, then this law permits export from the Big Chino Valley into a different watershed, into a different subbasin, the Prescott Active Management Area. They can export 3 acre feet per acre forever. ADWR estimates that there's almost 11,000 acre feet of HIA water credits available. So let's put all these credits into one chart here and add them up, see where we go. And so this is the type of credit in this column. So Prescott's unused portfolio, I'm estimating this, and I could be off by 1,000 acre feet. It's really hard to estimate what this is. So this is an estimate. I want to make that clear. It may not be correct, but it's probably not incredibly far off, okay? Extinguishment credits, this is data from ADWR at the end of last month. Long-term recharge accounts, this is the end of 2020, data from ADWR, so these are good numbers. Big Chino water, to import water from the Big Chino, Prescott Valley and Prescott split it up like this. So those are hard, good numbers. Here's the Big Chino HIA water. Chino Valley has a little piece of it, and I'm pretty sure this is what they told me last time I talked with them, but the sum of these is the 10,800. And then we have all the, we can total these up. So in the AMA, there's almost 12,000 acre feet per year of total paper water credits available, and any of these towns can buy these. Prescott Valley has this much in its portfolio, Prescott has that, and Chino has that. So if each one of these credits gets 5 homes, then you just multiply this by 5 and you get this. And then we still have a bunch of great plat rush lots that are available. And this is an estimate also, and it's very difficult to get an exact number for this. So Pardon the estimates. I'm just doing the best I can with what I got. But here's the total homes that can be built based on the legally available paper water. So I'd say 130 to 150,000 would be, a reasonable statement here. That's a lot. So if towns are just following the law, that's a lot of homes and a lot of water, and I don't think we're okay. So we can summarize this then. There's 17,600 authorized to this point. There's this many additional homes. That was the number from the previous chart. So this means that 2 people per home. This is the potential population growth. Here's the current population. This means that there's legally available water for us to grow to over 450,000 people in the Prescott AMA. I think that's shocking. In terms of overdraft, this is a really low ball estimate for the increase in overdraft. I've assumed that of the pumping that supports this, that 75% goes to permanent recharge. I haven't allowed to recycle water to support new development as they do now. So that would make these numbers much larger. I haven't counted development of small lots in unincorporated Yavapai County. That would make this much larger. And I'm missing data on the authorized unbuilt homes. Remember, that was a minimum. So this is surely a serious understatement. So how does that affect the aquifer? Well, qualitatively, it hurts. It's going to cause groundwater levels to fall. It's going to reduce stream flow. It's going to hurt water quality, and it's going to cause more wells to go dry. Quantitatively, CWAG is now preparing to use the new groundwater model. ADWR released a new groundwater model in this year, just a month ago, new groundwater model for the Prescott Active Management Area. So we've been evaluating that, and we're preparing to run it. And we're going to ask the model, where this is one of the questions we're going to ask. And I want to point out that even though all this legally available paper water is going to increase the overdraft, we're already the worst in the state. So this was just published in May by the Kyle Center, and the authors here is Kathleen Ferris and Sarah Porter. Now, Kathleen Ferris was the staff attorney for the commission that developed the Groundwater Management Act in 1980. She was a former director of ADWR, and she's the executive director of the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. She's an attorney. So Kathleen has had a really involved, and she's very knowledgeable, really had a strong role in Arizona water policy since 1980. So she wrote this report, and here's a table out of the report. So here's Prescott. Here's an overdraft, all long-term status, not good. Long-term direction, not good. Percent of overdraft by groundwater demand, 77.3%. For the Phoenix AMA, it's 16%. Pinal County is 26%. We're the worst in percentage terms of all the AMAs. So none of this makes any sense. And so now you get to the point of asking, how long will our water last? Can't answer that question. Because the aquifer does not behave like a bank account. So by what I mean is, let's suppose you have $1,000 in your savings account and you draw out $100 a month. How many months does it last? Well, 10 months. The aquifer doesn't work like that. First of all, we don't even know how exactly, or we don't have a very good estimate of how much water is recoverable. Imagine this. Suppose you have a bucket with 5-gallon bucket with 5 gallons of water in it. Okay, so if it works like a bank account, you know, in the bucket, it works like a tank of water. You can dip a gallon out and you can, when you dip out 5 gallons, the bucket's empty. Okay, so that's clear. On an aquifer, it doesn't work like that. Imagine that the bucket has a whole bunch of sponges in it. So you can dip in and take out some water and you might get a couple gallons out, and then there's no more liquid water to take out. There's water left, but it's in the pores of the sponges and you can't get at it. That's the way aquifers work. In order to get the water out of the aquifer, as the aquifer goes down and down and down, we have to drill more and more wells in a grid pattern spaced around the aquifer. Each well is going to be deeper. There's way more of them. This is going to cost a lot more money. There's legal restrictions on well spacings and locations. There's no way that science can tell us what the economically recoverable capacity of the aquifer is. So if you were going to be taking $100 a month out of your bank account, for instance, and you didn't know how much money was in the bank account, I think that the reaction would be prudence. We couldn't tell how long the bank account was last because we don't know how much is in there and we don't know how much of it we can get out. And so we can't tell you how long our water is going to last. That's not a question that hydrologic science can address. Despite that, some folks, especially in Prescott Valley, are making claims about 300 years of water or whatever, and that's just not possible. Will water limit growth? Well, it oughta, but the fact that I've just shown you is that Arizona water law facilitates development by authorizing legal paper water that permits enormous growth. So when you say that you're just following the law and everything's okay, that doesn't wash. Cities that follow the law will deplete our aquifer in the Verde River. And so for us, the lesson is that municipal policies, not state water law, are the way that we can manage a water supply. State water law is not going to constrain growth, not for decades, and then it'll be way overdrawn and too late and there won't be a river left. So municipal policies are the control point, and we're, as citizens, we have much more influence on municipal policies than we do on state law. So I guess I'm saying that prudence is the best policy that cities should undertake, and it's up to us to communicate that to our city officials. So this overdraft is going to continue to grow. This is not sustainable. The long-term future of the Verde River is deeply threatened. If that Big Chino water ranch goes into place, the river is in deep trouble. Safe yield is basically impossible without serious changes in state law or local growth policies. I want to say, though, that municipal water supplies are safe for now. Nobody's faucet's going to run out next month. In the long run, though, we all have a problem. In the short run, there's people on the edges of the aquifer that have a problem now. And those people with dry wells on the edges of the aquifer, that's going to grow. That dry well zone is going to creep in towards the middle of the aquifer as the water level in the aquifer drops, and there'll be more and more families that are burdened with a dry well and the loss of their home value. So what can we do? The government has a role, and water law needs to be modernized. This is a political problem, so that's addressable in principle by the voters, but in practice, there's so many entrenched self-interest that's going to be very, very difficult. Basically, it's up to us. Current state law harms and does not protect the aquifer. So local government is the venue here that I think has the best chance of success. And local governments need to cooperate in the region. We need to try new stuff like aggressive water conservation planning across the AMA. like water neutral development. If we could build new homes that would not impact groundwater, that would be great. That would be a good step forward to protecting our aquifer. What citizens could do is eliminate outdoor groundwater use, install water efficient appliances. If you have a well, you should get it tested for water quality. And with the results of those quality tests, you should consider installing home water purification equipment, because you're not protected by getting water from a municipal supply that's regulated by ADEQ. And you need to speak up to local government. Elected officials do respond to public input. They're not going to do anything unless they feel that there's some public support for it. They want to know that you have their back. So it's up to you to let them know what you want. And you should vote for candidates who support a sustainable water future. So that's the end of my long and involved quasi rant at you, I guess. I just want to, before we go to questions, I want to talk about, just point out we have programs coming up. You can pre-register at CWAGAZ.org on Saturday, October 9th. We're going to focus on, we're going to talk about some misinformation that's been consistently released, some incorrect ideas. And I've done a little bit of that today. And then most of the program, though, we want to devote to responding to your questions. We'll have a panel of CWAG people to answer your questions. And so that will be, I think, interesting. It's always interesting to us to see what your questions are. So if you want to send us your questions ahead of time, there's an email address. And then on Friday, November 12th, we're going to have Kathleen Ferris here to talk about that report, The Myth of Safe Yield. I think that will be fascinating. So with that, let's move to discussion, and I'll turn off my screen. And Gordon Bond is going to, has been collating your questions, and we will go from there. And I think also, Gordon, there's a ton of questions in chat. So why don't you turn on your video and audio, Gordon?
There.
Okay. So I wish that Ed was here to help me answer all these questions. I hope you guys are kind to me. So fire away. What did you come up with, Gordon?
Okay. There are a range of questions. I think some of you've already answered as you continued with your presentation, where people are asking, for example, what can we do? I think you covered that in terms of looking at both individual efforts as well as getting involved and putting pressure on city officials. That was covered pretty well. I think.
Well, you know, our website, CWAG's website, also shows that stuff. So there's a conservation section there that can give you a lot of personal water conservation hints. So.
Okay. I'm just going to go through specific questions as I made some notes. They won't necessarily be in chronological order, but Gary, call these kind of short snappers. First, what is the extent of agricultural pumping today? It used to be a lot of ag pumping, but what's the status today, Gary?
Well, up until like 1985, agricultural pumping was large. It started declining in the 80s. And in the 80s, municipal pumping started increasing. So we have a situation where ag pumping is going down as municipal pumping is coming up. And so they've almost completely changed places. So now municipal pumping is about 75, 77% of the pumping in the aquifer, and ag pumping is a few percent. So ag has gone away. And one reason is that water law permits farmers to fallow a field and get those extinguishment credits and sell them, and or they could use those extinguishment credits to develop their farmland with a subdivision. Some of that's happening in Chino now. And of course, a lot of those extinguishment credits have been purchased in Prescott Valley and Prescott to support further development.
Next, there are a couple questions dealing with the sources of data. For example, what is the source of estimates of water use by the exempt wells, by the family wells? I know I've seen that. Yes, go ahead.
That's data from ADWR. They have this enormous spreadsheet that is in a rainbow of colors. It's quite a work of art that has all this data in it, and that's available on ADWR's website. And we could post it on CWAG's website for those total data geeks out there.
Okay, another question, a factual question. Where is Prescott's water treatment plant? The water's pumped, is it treated right there in Chino, for example?
Well, I'm not 100% sure on this. I think that they pump it from Chino through a couple of subsurface pipelines. And these would run from Chino. They'd be on the west side of Highway 89. And then they go into a facility on top of Prescott Heights, on the hills there in Prescott Heights. And and then it's distributed from there to a very complex system. I suspect that the treatment happens there, but I'm not totally sure.
Okay. What we know for sure, though, when it comes to wastewater treatment, that is handled in both cities, Prescott Valley, and so forth. And that is the source of the water that goes to recharge and on to golf courses and other uses that are not providing water for people or for recharge. Next question. We have an observation. One of the participants has a 5,000 gallon tank, which it uses to reduce the duty cycle. In other words, the frequency of start and stopping of his pump. Gary, is that something that you've come across also?
Well, every domestic well has a pressure tank, so that when the pump in the well comes on, it forces water into the pressure tank, and there's a rubber bladder that separates the water from the air above it. So it compresses the air. When it gets to a certain pressure, the pump shuts off. And then as you use water in the house, a little squirt out of the faucet to wash your hands or something, gradually the water in the pressure tank flows out into the house. And when the pressure there gets low enough, the pump comes back on. So the pump cycles between a pressure range. It doesn't cycle on every time you open a faucet to brush your teeth. Having a 5,000 gallon tank to do that cycling would be a remarkable strategy. I've never heard of one that big before. The big water storage tanks that I showed pictures of, actually instead of a pump in the hole in the well, there's a pump that takes water out of that tank and puts it into a pressure tank. Just so it's those water storage tanks that replaces the well. The rest of the home water system remains the same.
Okay, here's a technical question that from PV, estimates of the total water available from the aquifer based on average saturation levels. That is, I guess, the source where PV has been claiming that there's plenty of water available. How does that relate to your comments with respect to the difficulty of understanding or being able to estimate the total water available in the aquifer?
I'm going to stay with my statements, which many of the CWAG hydrologists have talked to some notable groundwater modelers and hydrologists. And what I'm telling you is what they're telling me. I mean, I was a physical chemist. My role here is to interpret science to the lay public. And I believe in science. And so I'm going to believe what the experts tell me. And what they tell me is that there's no reliable way to estimate the recoverable water from a groundwater aquifer, the economically recoverable water from a groundwater aquifer.
Thanks. I lost my track here. Sorry. The question, there's a question, the status of the Big Chino pipeline. What is the status of that proposed project? I understand that it has been on hold for several years. What is this, taking place now, Gary?
Yeah, so in 2009, we had some litigation, which full disclosure I was part of, which challenged ADWR's decision to give Prescott access to water from the Big Chino. Part of the settlement of that litigation was this agreement in principle that between Salt River Project, Prescott Valley, and Prescott, recorded in 2010, that settled some legal dispute things, technical things I won't go into here. But Prescott and Prescott Valley agreed something that the environmental community had been asking them to do since 2001. They agreed that their pumping in the Big Chino would not harm the Verde River, would not diminish the base flow of the Verde River. So they're not saying that other people's pumping won't harm it, but that their pumping won't harm it. Okay, good enough. Now, how do you know that? Well, they also agreed to do a, I don't know, it's $5 or $6 million study called a monitoring and modeling study, where they did a lot of geophysical research, had USGS do that, and did flow measurements and weather and all kinds of things up there. So, and then that increased data on the aquifer, which has got to be one of the best studied aquifers in the United States by now. That data goes into a new groundwater model, which is about the third or fourth one that's been created. And that groundwater model is supposed to show if the Big Chino Water Ranch will harm the base flow. Every hydrologist we've ever talked to, including Prescott's own consultants, say that it will, by the way. So it's supposed to see if there will be harm to the river, and to sense ahead of time. It'd be a forward-looking study to anticipate any reduction in the base flow, so that they could mitigate that base flow somehow. We don't know how somehow it's going to happen. We don't know how that's going to work, but that everything is on hold until that groundwater model comes out, which is now supposed to be May, June, July, I forget the exact month next year. I think I heard May once, but somebody else said July. So middle of next year, that should be out. And that'll be really interesting. CWAG will go over that model with a fine tooth comb. All the Prescott City Council and Mayor verbally committed to us during the forum, as in the run-up to the last city election, that the city would release executable digital files of that model so that CWAG can run it and examine it. So we'll do that. So until that model comes out, happens, till that model comes out, the whole project's on hold. Now, the next thing though is pretty interesting. When Prescott did that groundwater gambit and came up with 9,700 odd new acre feet of water they could, and I talked about that in my talk, then they started saying that some folks in the council and started saying that, well, we may not need the Great Big Chino water at all. I mean, basically all of a sudden Prescott got more water than they really knew what to do with at the moment. So Prescott Valley, however, really badly wants that water. They're really counting on it to support an aggressive growth agenda that the town has. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out between the two partners in the pipeline. And that'll take a while, but that'll be interesting. So it's on hold for years, I would say.
Yes. Here's a quick question. What is the basis for that 100-year water supply designation? Why 100 years? Are people not worried about what happens in year 101? Where'd that come from?
Well, that came from Kathleen Ferris. Actually, she made a movie with her partner about the development of the Groundwater Management Act. And we showed that movie here in Prescott a few years ago at the Elks Theater, and Kathleen was here. And someone asked her that, or maybe it came up in the movie. And basically it was her idea, and there was a lot of resistance to it. And she really had to fight for it to make it happen at 100 years. So I think 100 years is kind of an arbitrary number, you know, kind of after I'm dead kind of a thing. So maybe people don't worry about it so much. I think we should ask her on November, in the November program, and get the answers straight from the source. But the 100 years is baked into Arizona water law at this point.
Stepping back, could you please review and clarify the meaning of paper water?
Well, there's wet water you can wash your hands with, and paper water, you know, it'd be like taking a sheet of paper and wadding it up and rubbing it on your hands, I guess. It's not real water. It's our concept of it is water that's legally authorized, but not physically sustainably available.
So it has to do with the legal authorization side of things, with the water law being able to commit actions that are not sustainable.
Yeah, admittedly, it's a term that has kind of emotional content, which I don't mind, and I'm happy to admit. I think people need to understand that there's a lack of reality in water law. They say one thing, safe yield, and they authorize the exact opposite with paper water.
Okay. Here's a comment and a question that governments often seem to respond to crises rather than trying to plan ahead and take action in advance. Any thoughts on what will precipitate government action for our situation? Let me start the answer by saying we just had an election in Prescott, which had some implications. So Gary, if you could talk generally about how to stimulate government action, and then specifically, what are the implications of the election election results from Prescott?
Well, one thing that'll stimulate immediate action is when people turn on the faucet and nothing comes out. As I said, that's a long ways off, where there's no immediate crisis. And I don't want anyone to misunderstand that. I mean, CWAG is not crying fire yet, you know? So this last election, look, CWAG is not a political, we're a 501c3. We don't endorse candidates. We work on issues, and our issue is water. We saw in this last election that many citizens, a greatly increased concern on the part of many citizens on water issues. Many times the citizens are concerned about growth, and they attach the water issue as a means of controlling or regulating growth. CWAG doesn't. We've been accused of being a bunch of no-growthers, wearing Birkenstocks and the like, but that's not true. Our position on growth is that growth shouldn't worsen the water situation. That's why we want to see work on water neutral development. So as far as what this new council will do, we'll have to wait and see. I think that the people that were elected are by and large much more concerned and much better informed about the water situation than the current council. I mean, the current council, we won't get the new council until just before Thanksgiving. So what citizens can do is communicate with your council people and with your supervisors and with your legislative representatives. They need to hear from you.
Okay. Here's a technical question about the future. Do you see direct potable reuse, so-called, according to our participant, toilet to
Don't
tap?
say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. So direct potable reuse means taking the sewage wastewater and putting it through the current wastewater treatment plant, which is A+ level of treatment, which is very good. And then after that, it goes through additional very high-tech purification steps, which involve microfiltration, which may involve reverse osmosis. It may involve ozonization or UV light treatment. When you do this, you basically wind up with water so pure that you've got to add regular well water back in so that it tastes good. This is being done in many locations. Wichita Falls, Texas does it. There's places in California. CWAG had a program on this a few years ago. That's in our video library. So it's a water recycling scheme. You know, you take wastewater and you purify it and you put it back into the potable water stream. So people can be uneasy about that. I guess you have to trust technology. I don't think it
sounds expensive, Gary. That sounds expensive.
It's actually cheaper than many other schemes. I mean, ADWR says that we can't meet safe yield without importing water. Importing it from the Big Chino, to me, is off the table because it's going to hurt the river. Where else could you get it? Well, you could do the direct potable reuse. That costs about $1,000 an acre foot. And so I don't think it'll happen because they have, right now, the city can do that kind of water recycling without paying $1,000 an acre foot. They do what's called indirect potable reuse. So they have the recharge ponds, it soaks into the ground, and state law allows them to immediately pump that volume of water out from the well field 7 miles away. So it's functionally the same thing as the direct potable water use, but without paying the $1,000. And of course, there's a hydrologic catch to that is another flaw in state water law, which I don't want to go into the details here. So state law gives direct potable water use an economic disadvantage. Other ways of importing water would be, the Central Arizona Project is looking at ocean desalinization plants on the Sea of Cortez, and that would cost about $22,000 an acre foot. Another scheme they're looking at is to import water from the Missouri River, which would be, so it'd be another $2,200 an acre foot. So there's all kinds of these schemes, and nobody's thinking of learning how to live with what we have, which is by far the cheapest thing you could do.
Okay, good. Let's go back to our situation of people who have exempt wells. The question is, how much of the recharge occurs with septic systems? You identified what happens with a municipal system where possibly as much as 75% can be recharged. What about the exempt well situation?
Right. So the 75% is the maximum theoretical recharge using Prescott's new rules, if I also assume that no groundwater is used outdoors. Those new rules were put in place last year, I think in 2020. Before that, in other words, for all the existing housing stock, it turns out that Prescott uses treated wastewater for golf courses. They have what's called direct reuse. And the amount and the homes that water serves, about 30% of their water use is outdoors. And so when you figure in the water losses from the outdoor use in current housing in Prescott, and it's similar numbers in Prescott Valley, and you figure in their direct reuse, it turns out that the amount that gets returned to the aquifer is about 30%. So the new water rules, by constraining outdoor water use and not allowing any additional direct reuse on golf courses, really make a big difference. So a septic tank, the recharge from a septic tank totally depends on a whole bunch of factors that nobody can even see or evaluate. For instance, how deep is the groundwater level? What kind of subsurface rocks and sands and gravels and clays are beneath you? What kind of vegetation is near the tank? How the tank is constructed, how the leach field is constructed. So it's impossible to say. The range of values that you hear is maybe 10%. USGS used 35% when they developed the Northern Arizona Regional Groundwater Flow Model. So someplace in there, 10 to 35%, basically it's not far off of what Prescott does now, the existing housing stock does now, not counting the new rules. So I think it's better for homes to be connected to the sewer. And certainly going forward, we should insist on that. But it's not, it's hard to evaluate this, especially for existing homes.
Okay, thank you. Now, looking ahead, you touched on the approach of water neutral development. That sounds pretty nifty, but could you elaborate a little bit more on what that involves?
Yeah.
What would a development like that look like?
Well, I showed a diagram showing how water flowed to a home using Prescott's newest water policies, and those water policies are easily the best in the AMA. They're not perfect and they can get better yet, but they're way better than anybody else has. In that example, at least 25% of the water that's taken out of the aquifer to supply that house is lost. So if we could make up that 25% some other way, we would have a water neutral development. So what we're looking at is collecting stormwater and recharging it. So water that falls on the roofs of the houses, on the driveways, on the streets, collecting that and putting it to recharge. If you do some simple numbers on this, and actually the Bureau of Reclamation ran through this for a bunch of scenarios as part of its SciWorms project. That's the Central Yavapai Highlands Water Resource Management Study, the acronym from hell. It's actually pretty easy to do. This is very feasibly done. You know, in a subdivision now, they have to collect all the stormwater runoff and detain it so that it does not flow into a neighboring property. So that cost of collection and detaining is already an existing expense for a subdivision. So all we would need to do would be, instead of detaining it, would be to move it to recharge. And so this needs some study and some work. The Upper Verde River Watershed Protection Coalition is now beginning to study this. CWAG is beginning to look at it. We need to learn a lot more about it and how it could be done, where it could be done. But this is really very, very promising. I'm hopeful.
Okay, great. Gary, I think covered just about all the questions. If I've missed some, please don't hesitate to contact CWAG at, is it priority at CWAGAZ.org, I believe. Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong. But if we've missed your questions, please contact us at priority@CWAGAZ.org. Now,
So
one
final thing. Phil Good has his hand up, and because he's our mayor-elect, I would like to allow him to speak. And I'm going to see if I can turn on. How do I do that? Allow to talk. Phil, you're on, but you're muted. Unmute yourself and tell us what you've got on your mind. So Phil is muted and I've permitted him to talk and we're not getting anything. So Zoom is not cooperating. I apologize, Phil. Maybe you could just type your comment in and Gordon can get it. Did we get all the questions, Gordon?
Gary, can you hear me? Yes.
I can.
I need to correct the CWAG. The correct CWAG address for people to contact is info@cwagaz.org. Or you can email us the questions from our website, cwagaz.org.
So Gordon, there was a bunch of questions that came in the chat and there's some in Q&A that you didn't address. Did you check both spots?
Okay, there are a couple other questions dealing with questioning this degree of accuracy of how well we can determine the volume of water in the aquifer, particularly the volume that is recoverable. For example, can we put a plus minus on that? What is the measurement error? Is that even possible? And the second related question is, what can we expect to find with respect to the new groundwater model? Will it provide a greater degree of accuracy in understanding and being able to project what may happen in the future?
So the new groundwater model in principle, yes, it should give us better answers. Actually, we have already been looking at it and we have a lot of questions about it. And it seems to me that we need to meet with ADWR and get some justification, because we have some misgivings about that model. As far as putting a plus or minus on the storage, ADWR in 1995 in a groundwater model estimated that there was about 3 million acre feet in the two aquifers. Later on, that changed to 3 to 5.2. And when we asked them to justify that, we got a memo back that didn't give any information. And they kind of bounce around in the number they give. Different communications give different numbers. So this makes me very uneasy, that it makes me feel like ADWR is not internally communicating very well. Either that or they can't make up their mind. That makes me very nervous, and I can't rely on those numbers at all. I'm unable to put a plus or minus on it. That would be for the hydrologist groundwater modeling to do. So those are some very rough numbers. Of that, say 3 million, if we take that, we still don't know how much of that is recoverable. They make assumptions that could be very wrong. We just don't know. So
Okay,
let's see. Maybe I can make Phil a panelist so he can communicate.
And I found one more question.
Okay.
And that is simply, what's the status of the Salt River adjudication process? That's a mouthful.
In 1974, Salt River Project filed a suit in state court to adjudicate the surface water rights in the Gila River watershed. There were some other similar suits then that it's all consolidated into what's now known as the Gila adjudication, which has been going on for what, 40 something years. They started working in the San Pedro River watershed. They've done a few claims. Adjudication means a court determination that this party has this much water with a certain priority date. So this has been a very complex, legally complex, hydrologically complex endeavor. It's taking forever. The next watershed to be done is the Verde Watershed. They're now filing a few technical orders and instructions to ADWR to begin work on that. This I don't know if it'll ever be completed. It's cost hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a real mess, and it has really caused a lot of uncertainty in the economic development and in the environmental community. We don't know the status of rivers. Businesses don't know much how much surface water they have. It's something that should be cleaned up, but it's tough.
Okay, there is encouragement for you to attempt to make Phil a co-host or a panelist. Meanwhile, I call people's attention to the chat. Toward the end of chat, John Porterfield has identified a study that gives some perspective in terms of the level of our situation compared, he says, to the melting of ice caps in Greenland and Antarctica, and he gives a link to that. So I call your attention to that. I think I've covered just about everything, Gary.
Right.
So at this
So,
point,
well, I've tried to make Phil a panelist. I've tried to open him up to talk. Somehow that's not working, and I apologize. And Phil, you can still post a comment on chat and we'll read it. We would welcome hearing from you. There was another couple of Q&As here. What's the basis for this statement? We're at the worst overdraft of all the management areas. ADWR is the basis for that. That table was published in Kathleen Porter's publication, and it was referenced. It was referenced to ADWR website, and I went and looked at it, and it was there. A week later, I went to look at it again, and it was missing. So I don't know what's going on with that.
Gary, that's table 4 on page 28, if I recall,
Yeah.
of the myth of safe yield by Kathleen Ferris.
So,
and a fresh question just popped up in their closing minutes here. Does fracking affect the groundwater?
There is no fracking in Arizona, except there is some potential fracking that could occur south of the Petrified Forest National Park. And that would be in search of helium. I don't believe that has yet been approved. It's kind of controversial. So luckily, we don't have to deal with fracking fluids contaminating groundwater. We just don't have oil and gas in our area.
Okay, well, I think that pretty cleans up my list. There was a suggestion that becoming aware of the potential arsenic levels, the encouragement to use proper filtration and double check the capabilities of the filter that you use. Also, oh yeah, Yavapai County is developing a general plan, as is Prescott Valley. And to what extent is CWAG participating in the development of these general plans? Would you care to comment on that, Gary?
I think people should tell the government what they want to see, and the county is asking for your input.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely do it. So
We do
I'm
have
looking at the chat here, and there's some other questions we might address. Since groundwater is owned by the state, could population centers outside our area make a claim on local aquifers? No, Peter Stivers. No, Peter, good question, but the Groundwater Transportation Act prohibits transfers from into active management areas, except, and here's where I was talking about Arizona water law has all these loopholes and exceptions, except Prescott can transfer from the Big Chino and Phoenix can transfer from the Harquahala Irrigation District. So yeah, that's prohibited except. So how did I determine the amount of exempt well pumps? That was from ADWR. How does SRP affect the water laws? Well, SRP is the gorilla in the room, and they have tremendous influence at ADWR and at the governor's office. So they have influence through political efforts. So looking at a kind of the couple. What's the schedule for the Paulden to Prescott Valley water line? We'll be seeing work anytime soon? No, decades. So looking at some more. That was your crisis question. there's nothing like a good crisis to prompt action. Unfortunately, there's no crisis on the municipal water companies. So I don't know. I think we've got most of them here. Anything else? We're kind of at the end of our 2 hours.
Yep.
Hey, thank you all for sticking with us and listening to this. If you have any comments or if you have questions that we didn't answer, if you'll just email info@cwagaz.org. I will see that and I'll respond to your question via email. I guess that's the
Gary, one final
end of our day.
pitch. We invite everybody to join CWAG. Go to our website, sign up. We'd love to have you become members.
Great. All right, you guys, it's time for you to go on with your day and enjoy the weekend. Myself, I am going to go down to the Verde and take a walk and relax. So I'll see you all later and I'll end this enterprise now. Thank you so much for attending. Bye.